Welcome to High Stakes, Episode 2. I am your host, Neil Orfield, and I am joined today by the first professional DFS player I ever met in person. He was brought over to the couch next to me last year at the Tournament of Champions, and he introduced himself as Travis. And I looked at him, and I had seen him recently in an interview that I watched on the Lowell's podcast. And I said to him, "Are you Travis Pettey?" And we talked for a little bit. And after a brief conversation, I turned to my wife and I said, "This is one of the guys that I wanted to meet here at this event. He's one of the DFS pros that I have a lot of questions for." And she turned to me and she said, "Yeah, I can tell. You're acting like you met a celebrity just now." Kind of an embarrassing story, but I have to admit it's kind of true. Travis Pettey is one of those names that I've been seeing at the top of DFS leaderboards for years, that I've been kind of following his progress, watching him win tournaments, and I was pretty excited to meet him. So I'm happy to be talking again today, Travis. Looks like you're having a pretty great NBA season. How are you doing overall?
Things have been great. Yeah, NBA's gone pretty well overall. Last week's not so well, but that's kind of the way it goes, right? But no, the Super Bowl event was a lot of fun, and we were super lucky to be put in the same little pod as you guys.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We did a little bit too much drinking, but I had a really good time. And you were only there for 2 days, right? You came in on Saturday. You were there obviously for the event, and then out on Monday, right?
Yeah, because of the COVID thing being a little bit of a concern, we got there as late as possible. Saturday night, I think we got in like 6 p.m. Went straight to the event, basically. Didn't eat anything, drank a lot, and yeah, the Super Bowl day was rough.
Yeah, it was rough other than the winning $1 million, so I assume.
Yeah, that turned around pretty good, actually.
Yeah, that can fix things really quickly. Well, yeah, happy to have you on the show. Really excited about this. Let's dive right into some strategy and approach right away. I like to talk about that. I feel like you don't do a lot of content, so I feel like with you, people don't really know how you do what you do, and people will be really interested to hear about your DFS strategy, your approach. So let's dive into that a little bit. So we talked a little bit last year, like I said, and I've also watched you in 4 or 5 podcasts. You've been on Lowell's a few times. You were also on The Theory of DFS with Jordan Cooper as a guest. So I can have an idea of what you do, but obviously I don't know everything you do, and the audience probably hasn't watched all of the shows that I have. So I'm sure people are really interested to hear how you approach DFS. So let's just start by covering a few of the basics. I believe you told me last year that you use Fantasy Cruncher as your optimizer. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I use Fantasy Cruncher basically just about for everything. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Me too. And I think you said on a podcast that you've hand built one lineup, and I don't know if this is still true since that podcast, but you had hand built one lineup in like the past 3 or 4 years, and that was for the Tournament of Champions that you won the million. Is that still correct? Still that you don't hand build anything?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't fully hand build it, but I mainly hand built that one. But I hand built a recent free roll, the last FanDuel free roll, and it went really poorly. So I'm gonna probably stop doing that.
All right, that makes sense. Somebody asked in my post about questions that people might have for you, whether you do simulations. You recently said on an episode of Lowell's that you are horrible with computers, so I think it might be safe to assume that you don't run your own simulations. Is that the case? Do you run your own simulations, or do you use simulations from another source? Is it part of your process at all?
No, you're absolutely right. I don't understand computers very well, especially considering I'm on computers all day. It's pretty embarrassing. I don't know how to run simulations really. I don't really know what sites to run simulations either. Maybe I'm not using those sites. So no, simulations are not part of my game at all. I'm sure it could improve my style if I knew how to do it, but I just don't.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously Run the Sims, I know, is a site that does simulations, and I know Awesemo does simulations for like the boom bust tool, but yeah, it's not a big part of my process either, other than looking at the Awesemo tools that do their simulations. But I certainly don't know how to run my own. Do you have any background in programming or math or anything like that?
No. I'm actually a 1-year college dropout. I tried to do a Udacity programming course about 6 months ago. I didn't last very long. I just didn't have the patience or the passion for it. It's tough to learn something new when you don't really care as much as you like, about it. I thought going in I'd be more interested. I wasn't. So I don't really have any sort of programming, or I'm good at math. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not like programming math or anything. I can't do any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of the same way. I never did any advanced math in college or anything. I'm pretty naturally mathematically brained, I would say, but it's not something that I'm trained in at all. But you've obviously had some success anyway, despite having no real training in math. I'd say where you set yourself apart in DFS is that you do your own projections, including doing minutes projections from scratch. Do you also do your projections for other sports, or do you use available public projections?
So I've really toned down my DFS play outside of NBA over the past year. So I do football, of course. I've changed like my style like 6 times this season. Nothing seemed to work. I'll use projections and try to do ownership. I'll do my own stuff and I'll do literally everything I tried. Nothing worked. So in other sports, football, I did golf for a little while. I tried doing my own projections. I'm not nearly as confident in them. It's hard to do your own projections and then have a couple bad weeks and stay confident enough to see it through. Maybe this is where simulations or something would come in handy to give me some more confidence. But in other sports, I'm definitely a lot more. I lean a lot more on the tools of the websites than basketball.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I would think that other sports are just not nearly as projectable as NBA. So you may have not had the success that you have in NBA, but that could just be because you can't really count on the projections. They're not as good. They can't be as good because it's just not nearly as projectable, I would think. But so you said that you are closer to the chess is okay workload where you're working around 80 hours a week. Is 80 hours you think about right?
I mean, it depends what you mean by work, right? Like, is watching the games work? It's not that important. There are some moments where you'll see something that I'll be watching a game. Like, for example, this past week, the Clippers were playing the Mavericks, and I was watching. It was the second game. They played back-to-back games against each other. I was watching the second game, and I noticed Zubac was guarding Doncic. I was like, this is really bizarre. I've never seen that in my life. And I looked back at the first games a bit on the video, and I think that's happening again. From when I was the few possessions I was watching. So like stuff like that can be really important to watch. But like, I don't consider that work. I don't think it's overly important. But for 80 hours a week, if you count watching games, yeah, I think I definitely hit that.
Yeah, that's really impressive. I mean, I think that I spend a lot less time than that. But then, yeah, if you factor in everything that you do after lock, certainly I think that even for more casual players like myself, the hours add up a little bit if you count all of that time in there. Would you say that you spend most of your time doing minutes projections? I'm sure to the extent that you're willing to share, the audience would love to know a little bit of what goes into your minutes projections. You just said that you were watching a game last week between the Clippers and the Mavs. Is that something you do regularly? Like, do you watch bits of every NBA game? Do you watch them in full? How much are you watching basketball?
So I don't. It's pretty rare for me to go back and like watch a game. It's mainly if I see something happen, like a rotation is missed by a guy. Like, did he get injured or something, or what's going on? Was this guy going to sub in like 2 minutes before he actually did? Because sometimes those guys are at the table forever, and you look at like a rotation thing, like there's tools everywhere. There's like popcorn machine. There's Admiral Funds has one. I think River Grinders has like Court IQ. There's a lot of things you can look at. Like, and you look at these things like, and there's like a blip and something's off. And you look at the game like, oh, this guy was literally, there's no stoppage. So these things happen. The majority of my 80 hours, by the way, a lot of these 80 hours are like, I'm not obviously focused like 100% on this. I'm doing other things too. And like, I'll just pop up, look at a projection or whatever. But I'd say the majority, are looking at minutes. If I like allot my time into, different sections, the majority of the 80 hours is not minutes, but the majority of my work would be minutes. Like if you like, I have minutes, you got fantasy points per minute, you got watching the games. I'd say the majority of the time is being used on doing minutes.
Figuring out rotations and stuff, and what's going to happen if starters miss time, who's going to be stepping in, or in different matchups, who is going to be playing, or is a team going to go big or small? Is that the kind of stuff that you're typically spending your time on, figuring out how minutes are going to shake out in different matchups and in different situations with players being out for various reasons?
100%. The thing is, every game is so unique, and trying to find patterns between games is pretty difficult. Occasionally you'll find something like, I don't know, maybe like you'd be going versus Denver or something, you need a big center to guard Jokic or something, but that's not always the case, right? I mean, I think it was last night we saw Porter was guarding, I believe Porter or somebody was Looney was guarding Jokic at one point. So right. It's been a lot harder the past few, I'd say even three plus years, because it used to be in the NBA, there's a big on the court, you need a big to guard him, but that's not the case anymore. So you need to figure out which teams will play big against and which teams won't. It's a lot about patterns. It really is. And it is difficult. And, I struggle the most at 3 points of the season, the very beginning when there's no real patterns yet. Like my fundamental knowledge of the NBA is strong. I should theoretically be stronger at the beginning before the projections are off, like pretty good, but I struggle at the beginning. I struggle around the trade deadline when there's a lot of moving pieces. And then I struggle at the end of the season when like just all hell breaks loose and you don't know what the hell is going to go on. Those are the 3 times I struggle at, because to me, it's the least projectable and the least amount of patterns are important.
Yeah, that makes sense, that you'd, be able to do a little bit better when you can count on your projections a little bit more. And I think you said that on one of the podcasts that I watched recently, that you really struggle in the beginning of the year and then really pick up after you know a little bit more and you can actually figure out the rotation. Do you think that's do you think it's more of an edge now for you as somebody who is paying close attention and using all these different tools, that it is a little bit weirder now that you can't count on a team going big against a big? Do you think that that's kind of to your advantage, that it's not as projectable, so you can, kind of find little micro edges in knowing how teams are going to handle different situations?
I don't know. It goes both ways, right? It goes both ways, because I mean, I still believe that when there's an important big on one side of the court, you need to match them with the big. And I will almost always play teams as if they're going to play their big against them. But so I look really stupid sometimes. So it can go both ways, right? It's hard to say. It's really case by case.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like, to me, I'd say being willing to look stupid sometimes is part of being a good DFS player, because you kind of need to take some risks, right?
Oh, you 100% have to.
Yeah. And you mentioned a few tools that you use: Popcorn Machine, Court IQ. Any other tools that you find really helpful in analyzing what teams have done in past matchups and what they might do with certain players missing?
I mean, I'm sure there's lots of tools out there, but like those 2, I think the most known ones, or Admiral Funds has one that's pretty good too. Yeah, I'm sure there's more out there. They're all probably the same concept, but I think it's pretty important to look at those.
Okay. And how much time do you spend listening when you're figuring out minutes and stuff to what coaches are saying? Because sometimes a coach will say, oh, I think I'm going to shake up the starting lineup, or they'll be really complimentary of a player, or they'll say, he didn't get back on defense. And you can maybe pick up little things here and there from what coaches are saying about players. How much time do you spend listening to what coaches are saying about players and potential changes to the lineup?
So this is something in hindsight, it's hard to say now, because I should preface it by saying I actually don't listen to coaches at all.
Okay.
And it's something I could definitely improve on, kind of similar to the patterns you see in teams. Like certain teams will play X style, some teams will play Y style. Like coaches lie a lot. And it's one of those things where every time I try to listen to coaches here, it seems like they're telling me something that's not at all what's happening. I remember it happened last time I listened to coaches was Philadelphia about 2 months ago, kind of during peak COVID. Doc was talking about his team, and I thought they'd go a lot deeper than they actually did. He said they're going to play like all the guys, including like the random dudes on the back of the bench, and those guys didn't play. And after that, I kind of swore off listening to coaches, because the websites are really good at listening to coach speak and whatnot. And, the minutes are pretty good for the most part, but when coaches lie, the minutes are way off. And that's kind of where a big edge potentially is, when the coaches do lie and everybody is thinking they're going to play one way when they don't. So I feel like between the noise of the coaches lying, and they do lie a lot, and the value you can get from being different than everybody else, I don't listen to coaches at all.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, I don't really either. Occasionally I'll factor it in when it comes up on a show, and I find it kind of interesting. Maybe I will a little bit, but it's not something that I factor in a whole lot either. So that's good to hear that that's not one place that I'm missing out on finding a little bit of an edge. Anything else you're willing to share about how you project minutes, or is that kind of all that goes into it?
Well, I mean, it's possible that I'm missing out on stuff because I'm listening to coach speak too, right? If you can, sift through the noise and figure out and kind of know what coaches are telling the truth when it could be pretty valuable, I think. I know yesterday, I can't remember. So I do look at the size projections still to kind of see what things are looking like. And I remember one site, I can't remember what it was, but it had like Poku, whatever his name, Pokushevsky, whatever his name is.
Yep.
Yeah, his minutes were like extremely high, and I was really surprised to see that. And Maladon also was really high, and it didn't make any sense based on like the recent trends. So I was really confused about that. And in the end, I think both those guys actually played pretty strong minutes. So it's possible that there was some coach speak in there that I didn't see, that these sites, I can't remember which site it was, saw and up their minutes on, and stuff like that. I'll get crushed on, but. I've done well enough to be confident in my process being good enough.
Yeah, and the site was right, so let's just assume that it was Awesemo. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. It very well could have been. Yeah, I look at Awesemo for sure.
Yeah, I saw one of your recent interviews. I think it was on Jordan's podcast. You said something along the lines of every like 3 days or so, you'll find a minutes projection that's like 6 or 7 points off, and that's kind of your biggest edge, right? In those spots where you can just see that clearly the site isn't right about what this minutes projection is. Would you say that that is your biggest edge? And is that still the case? Has it gotten lesser or more over the years? Do you think the minutes projections are better now than they were last year, 2 years ago, or do you think that they're kind of still on par with where they have been?
No, they're definitely better. Every year the site projections seem to get stronger and stronger, which, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Especially in GPPs, because everybody's gonna play the chalk guys, no matter what. And there are mistakes still, like for example, like Wiggins yesterday was Aaron Wiggins was a mistake. I definitely screwed that one up, but no, there still are projection sites that are 5 to 6 minutes off every few days, I'd say, for sure. The last big one I can remember was DeAndre Hunter 2 games ago. This was was it a 2-game slate? Yeah, it was a 2-game slate. I don't remember why there's a 2-game slate. Super Bowl Sunday. Yeah, Super Bowl Sunday. The 2-game slate, Super Bowl Sunday. I think the industry was like 31 minutes for him or something like that. And he ended up getting like 36, 37, 38 minutes. And I had him, I think, around 36. It was just such a home run spot for him. And so there are big mistakes still by the sites,
Yeah, and on a 2-game slate, I mean, that's a pretty massive edge to find that kind of difference.
Yeah, and I mean, you think so. It didn't work out amazingly, but it's definitely like a 2-game slate. Yeah, it's hard to find that big of a difference.
Yeah, you still need to get pretty lucky, even when you do find that difference. But yeah, definitely helps. So I remember last year at the Tournament of Champions, I was kind of trying to, I was trying to learn what I could from you a little bit. And I was kind of asking you a little bit of what goes into doing your own projections. And you basically told me it's pretty simple: fantasy points per minute multiplied by minutes that you project in the game. But I'm kind of in the back of my mind going, yeah, but fantasy points per minute is like has little different variables going into it. So obviously that can be a little bit different for everybody. But is that something that you do on your own also? Do you calculate your own fantasy points per minute, factor in things like Vegas total, individual matchups, whatever else might go into it? Or is that something that you just trust the publicly available data is close enough? Or how do you do fantasy points per minute to the extent you're willing to share?
Sure. I definitely have less confidence in my fantasy points per minute than my minute projections. But fantasy points, I mean, I say it's easy, but it's really not that easy. So you got to look at the matchup. DFS is more than just points, right? I know a lot of people look at like, oh, this team scores 100 a game and now they're at 110. Like that's a nice 10% boost, but it's a lot more than that, right? So some teams will turn the ball over more. Some teams get blocked more. Some teams will give up more assists, 3-pointers. Like each team is very unique in their own style. I remember, I haven't looked at the numbers that closely lately. I automate that stuff. But I remember in the past, like, what was it? Maybe it was Utah. People would be really scared to play against Utah, but like centers versus Utah weren't so bad because Gobert sits next to the rim. So there actually be a lot of rebounds available. And like these slower paced games aren't necessarily so bad for big men. Whereas obviously guards are thrive more in like a high pace environment. Big men are not so bad in slow paces. People would be surprised to think that. Team totals are not everything, right? So yeah, I factor in the matchup. The spread's important too. Obviously a 16-point spread is not the same as a 1-point spread. Whether teams on a back-to-back, if they're on a back-to-back, they're more likely to play less minutes. Those are the main things. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, but I do a lot of things to compute a fantasy points per minute projection.
Okay.
But it's pretty difficult. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure that it is. So you brought up the spread factors in there. You recently said on Jordan's podcast that you do factor in blowouts. So I'm curious to what extent you factor in blowouts. I mean, do you just cut back a couple minutes from all the starters if it's like a spread of 14 points, 16 points? And at what point do you start factoring in the blowout?
Yeah, so for me, it's simple as like every point is closer to a blowout. So 1 point is less close to 3 points and so on. So every point I'll take a little bit off for each added point to the total of the spread. And obviously the higher the spread gets, the more valuable the garbage time guys get too.
Right.
In the end, the minutes of my team will add to 240, but the higher the spread, obviously, the less starters minutes at the end. So you need to factor that in.
Even at the bottom, like even like a 1-point spread to a 3-point spread, do you factor that in even in terms of the potential for a blowout?
Yeah, because I mean, there's always gonna be a chance for a blowout regardless.
Yeah. So just entirely scalable across the number of points.
And it's not a perfect system by any means, but it's worked.
Seems to work pretty well. Yeah. So good enough, I would say.
Yeah.
So another thing that we talked about last year that really stuck with me is that you told me, I was talking about content, wondering how much content you consume, and you told me don't listen to losing players. And I think that is really important. I found it really interesting hearing you say that, and I think that it's true. I mean, there's, especially in fantasy football, I think more than any, but really all fantasy sports, there is so much information out there. There are an infinite amount of people wanting to do DFS content, giving advice, and a lot of the stuff is just, and a lot of these guys are, really smart guys, clearly know their math, come up with these different calculations and different correlations between lineups. And a lot of it to me just seems like it's really noise, and like they come across as really convincing and you want to listen to them and hear what they have to say. And then you think, well, why am I listening to this guy? I've never seen him win anything. But I'm curious, how much content do you consume? Because I still find plenty of, content creators who are good at DFS. So I still find myself consuming a fair amount of content. And I think I've seen you a few times, at least in the past couple of months, in the YouTube comments as I'm watching an NBA stream. So do you consume a lot of content, and do you generally consume it for the entertainment value, or do you find that you can still learn things? Even though you're a lot deeper into the data than I am, do you still find that you can learn things that you may have missed about changes in the rotation or the way things may be changing? Maybe somebody lost minutes due to foul trouble or something. Do you still kind of learn stuff, or is it more for entertainment purposes for you when you are consuming content?
So mainly if I'm looking at like if I'm on a show or something, it's just brief. Like I get sent there by YouTube, or I'm just looking to pass some time because at certain times I'm waiting for NBA news, nothing's coming out. But when I'm listening to a show, I like to interact with it too. I know some people like to just be in the background. I like to talk to show, whether they can see my comment or not. Not a big deal. I'd like to be a part of the chat. So I don't listen to content ever really. If you see me, if I'm there, I'm chatting though. So you'll know if you're looking at the chat, you'll know I'm there if you know the names of everybody. But it's pretty rare. Yeah, I already spent so much time on NBA DFS right now that I don't need to add more to my plate. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I try to be singularly focused when I'm doing like minutes or whatever. So like if I'm listening to something in the background, it might distract me and whatnot.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. It can be a lot of noise. For somebody like me who's not really as involved in the data deep into it as you, it's definitely helpful, but I can see why if you're doing all that stuff yourself, it's just kind of, you don't want to add that noise to it. That's funny. I think actually the first time I saw you on a show was on a Lowell's episode, and they started with Alex Baker as the guest, and then he had to leave, and then about 5 or 10 minutes later, they saw you in the chat and they said, hey, Travis, if you want to come on. And that's the first time I ever saw you. It's because you were commenting on a YouTube show. So that's pretty funny. They're also not really a strictly DFS. They're not really giving DFS advice generally. It's more of an entertainment show. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Lowell's is actually probably the show I watched the most. Again, it's not as much DFS. It's more like just shooting the shit, whatnot. And I appreciate that. There's some DFS involved. There's some good discussions. But Brick is obviously one of the smarter guys at DFS, and then Pete cracks me up. So I enjoy tuning into those guys.
Yeah, I definitely watch most weeks. I was actually, as I was going back and kind of trying to find your interviews to remember what you talked about previously, I was shocked at the number of episodes they've done. I didn't realize that they were in the hundreds already. I definitely was not watching the early shows, but yeah, I definitely these days watch most weeks. Pretty entertaining show. One of the things that you said on a couple different shows that I found really kind of surprising is that you don't play an ownership style in DFS. You play a projection-based style, which is totally counter to the way I play. I know it's counter to the way Jordan plays. I think it's counter to most players are kind of playing that game theory a little bit. But I think you acknowledge on one of the shows that kind of works for you because you do your own projections. So you just naturally get different because, your projections give you different players than guys like me who are using Awesemo's publicly available projections. So do you think that's true, that you can play more of a projection-based style than an ownership-based style, where you don't really have to get into the game theory because you're so deep into it yourself that you're, creating your own projections?
Yeah, that's 100% the case. I get naturally contrarian, not intentionally, but it's natural. If you look at the high stakes stuff, like a Thunderdome or a Hall of Famer, if I'm playing in it, you'll notice that I play generally pretty different than most guys, and it's worked out pretty well. I think kind of what you said, because I do my own stuff, and I try to be creative, right? Sometimes I'll make a stand on a guy and maybe go a little too higher than maybe he should be, just so I get more of him. But I don't manipulate my numbers very often. I try not to, because when I do, I remember, like yesterday, I actually X'd a team. I X'd Orlando in the first game just because I was getting Cole Anthony, and I saw all the late potential value that could be. And when I say yesterday, I mean today's Thursday.
It was yesterday.
So,
pretty sure it was yesterday.
Yeah, but
this is coming out Friday.
Yeah,
I see what you mean.
I don't want to try to confuse people.
Right.
So Wednesday slate. I asked them because I was getting a lot of Cole Anthony, and I didn't look at that like a crazy amount into him. I wasn't expecting to get a lot of them, because when there's 11 games, you can only do so much on each guy, and I was getting like an uncomfortable amount of them. So I X'd him instead of doing anything else because it was getting late. I crunched really late. That's probably something I should do better. And I X'd him, and I never do that.
Okay.
And of course, yesterday it was not the right time, but so I don't manipulate my numbers very often. Whatever comes out is usually what I'll get, no matter, even if it's a guy that's supposed to like 2% under something. I don't mind playing him 80% if I feel like it's the right play. And kind of what we said earlier, I don't mind looking stupid. If you look at my ownerships over the year in a vacuum, you'll see like I have insane overshares and insane undershares on certain guys. And some days I'll look really stupid, some days I'll look really smart. But that's, the terms are so top heavy that you have to take stand somewhere. If you don't, you're just going to be one of everybody, and you're going to lose the rake, which is not small by any means. Right. So it works out. It works out for me. When I do well, I usually do extremely well. When I do poorly, like, yesterday, for example, I get absolutely crushed, which is okay.
Yeah. I think, I always forget who actually had this quote. It's one of the bigger DFS guys, says it's not about how often you win, it's how much you win when you win. You got to win big when you win. So I think that's a really smart approach. But just getting back to the ownership versus projection discussion just a little bit. So I'm curious, when you make those stands about like, I'm going to play a lot of this guy, or maybe I'm going to lock this guy in those cases, is it kind of ownership based? Is it you see, oh, wow, my projection is giving me 60% of this player, and I see the field is only going to play 10%. This is a spot where I can really find my edge. Are there some situations like that where you will take kind of an ownership based approach in NBA, or is it always, I mean, you mentioned Cole Anthony. That's a good example of somebody that wasn't really based on ownership. It was based on, there might be, it was the first game of the slate. There might be late breaking news, which I sometimes do the same thing. I'm like, well, he projects really well right now, but he might not in half an hour. So that makes a lot of sense. But how often do you factor in ownership at all in those kinds of decisions?
No, I didn't know what his ownership was when I X'd him out. I just saw that I had a huge amount of them. In hindsight, I could have done a lot of things. I could have capped him. I could have just lowered his thing, but I was running really close to lock for whatever reason. And the easiest thing was just to X the team out, unfortunately. But it's the way it goes sometimes. In hindsight, maybe it wasn't the worst move.
He didn't do that great. He was fine.
He was solid, but like the Houston stuff opened up.
Yeah.
And that was actually pretty important to win the slate. So I guess even considering his good result, it wasn't so bad. But then like the other ones, like the Morant ended up being in, and then somebody else in that same time frame ended up being in. That was Edwards. Yeah, man. So it was okay. Again, if you shoved into Houston instead of going Cole Anthony, it could have been pretty good actually. I think he would have made off well, even though Cole Anthony had a pretty good game.
Yeah, he had a pretty good game. Lost some time to the blowout, but yeah, I slammed in John Morant, one of my better plays of the year, I think, yesterday. Jammed him in because of the low ownership and won myself some steak knives. Do you call it steak knives? It's not second place. I didn't get up to second place, but won a little bit of money yesterday, which is better than usual in NBA.
No, I know Blender says that. I think I don't know if he popularized that. I don't say steak knives. If I get second place, I'm perfectly content. At least means I'm not getting my ass kicked. But the John Morant thing yesterday, it makes a lot of sense shoving him in because he's low owned and he does have the upside. in theory, it makes a lot of sense. It's just not the kind of play I'll ever make. It's not my style. I know it works, and it worked for you yesterday, and I'm sure it worked really well. Like, when people say, "Oh, why don't you do this, this, and this?" and in my mind, it makes a lot of sense. But like my process, I don't really know how it factor in. Like, am I just gonna boost the guy by 10 points? Like, to me, I try to
put so much
naturally.
work. You put so much work in on the front end that it doesn't make sense for you to make those kinds of changes, I would think, because you have good projections. You work so hard on your projections that you don't want to throw those off. I think, it's kind of what I'm understanding is because you put in so much work and making the best projections, you don't really need to be kind of fidgeting with things later based on game theory, because your game theory is just my projections are the best and they're going to win over time. You're gonna, you make a lot of money just using better projections, so you don't need to make those kinds of decisions. Whereas people like myself who don't put in, the 80 hours a week, we have to kind of play a little bit more into the game theory, I would think.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And again, because I'm naturally contrarian and I don't really look at ownership that much, so it's possible that some guy, maybe I'm getting crushed in the early games, but I have some guy that nobody else has anyway. As a high owner for myself. So I don't need to switch around. I already have like the market contrarian option.
Let's take a break from this conversation with Travis Pettey so I can remind you to give us a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our DFS shows, DFS offers, giveaways, and much more. Once you subscribe, hit that notification button to get alerts when our shows go live. Be sure to also check out our monthly podcast giveaway. Just subscribe to our podcast channel and leave a 5-star review with your Awesemo username or Twitter handle to be entered to win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. One question that I got from a listener that I wanted to ask, I think I know the answer, but because I think you've talked about this a little bit, but I want to just confirm here. So you typically only make 150 lineups, right? So my understanding is you make 150 lineups, and obviously you're playing all 150 in a 150 max. But my understanding is also that in like a single max, a single entry contest, you're just playing the top projected lineup. In a 3-man, you're just playing the top 3 projected lineups, 20-man, top 20. Is that the case? Is that correct? Or do you sometimes switch it up a little bit?
Close. It's close. Okay. So I do 150 lineups only. Not one of those. I think Awesemo is one of the guys that's like 1 million lineups. Like I can't do that. I like to know what I have, and I like to look at Fantasy Cruncher and be able to look like my top 10 lineups and make sure like everything's okay. But so there's no like perfect way for me to do this. I'll open my CSV at like 352, 350, like 10 minutes per lock. And then I'll literally copy paste my 150 and then put like the first 20 into like the top 20 spots. So usually that's like Thunderdome, Hall of Famer, All-Star, and like the whatever the NME for the high stakes is. And then I'll put 1 through 150 like slot 21, and then I'll cover like the next like 30 entries. And then like there's no perfect science to it at all. But basically my top like 20, 30 entries have 98% of my action.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't try to put like, so like maybe like after like, so it's almost always like, again, Thunderdome, Hall of Famer, All-Star, and then the big high stakes max entry. And then after that, it might be like the first line might be like a 3 max lineup. And then like lineup 6 of the second, like 30 entries might be like some random single entry. I don't try to put certain lineups in single entry and whatnot. It's just whatever comes in. In the end, I copy paste all my lineups into my CSV in like 30 seconds. So I'm not picking and choosing what lineup goes where.
Okay, that makes sense, especially because you're playing a lot of different contests. You said on one podcast recently, I think it was Blenders, that you max enter everything. Is that the case like every night? I mean, are you playing the Monster and the 777? Are you max entering all of those contests every night, or is that kind of something that you switch up day to day?
So I max enter the main slate. Okay. I don't play the late slate almost ever. I'm just so invested in the main slate, and I get so caught up in the game flow and the actual games and watching them. It's hard for me to transition back into doing another slate when I'm already, I'm very high strung on how the initial slate's going. And I feel like I've already put the work in. It's kind of my time to relax and just enjoy the games. I'm a huge NBA fan. Right. So I don't play the late slate very often, even though I know I should.
But on the main slate, are you max entering several different contests within the main slate, or do you mean you're just max entering? Okay.
Yeah, so any GPP, I should say, not non-cash, I play. And that goes all the way. I haven't played the Thunderdome as much lately. I don't know that they really run them anymore. But the Beast, I used to play every day. I don't play every time now. That's the FanDuel winner take all 5K.
Okay.
But I have other reasons not to play the FanDuel 5K. The
Okay.
Thunderdome is more, it doesn't run every night.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, that would be to me that would seem really stressful, but obviously when you're winning as much as you are, it makes some sense to do that. I'm curious, do you have a preference about the number of games on a slate, and do you take a different approach? Speaking about NBA specifically here.
Definitely. I definitely prefer 4 to 6. Used to be like, that's like my bread and butter all time. I'm beginning to really appreciate 3-game slates. 2-game slates is kind of pushing it. But I'd say 3 to 5 now would be my favorite. 6 is solid. 7's okay too. Every game beyond that just gets harder and harder. Again, the more time I have to put into a single game, the better I'm going to do. But obviously you need a certain amount of games. Like 2 is kind of pretty close. But yeah, on these 3-game slates, because everybody kind of plays the same way, you can get some crazy ownerships on certain guys, high or low. Again, the Hunter one's a good example. It was a 2-game slate. Hunter was, I think, 25% owned, and he may have been the best play of the slate, which that's insane. So you'll get those in 2-game slates. Occasionally, most of the time the 2-game slates are not overly exciting. And that's pretty darn rare. But yeah, I definitely changed my style. I'll be more aggressive on guys the lower amount of games there are.
Okay.
I get less aggressive. Like, it's hard to get aggressive on a guy at an 11-game slate when he's not like a great value, because even if he does has a ceiling game, it's not like insanely helpful.
Right.
So I definitely struggle at the higher game slates for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I'm the same way. I struggle on those. That's I'm back to negative ROI on Wednesdays, which I think is just because of NBA DFS. They're always the biggest slates, and I just don't really do as well on the bigger slates. One other thing, I skipped over this a little bit when we were talking about ownership. I know that you said that you don't factor it in basketball at all. Do you take more of a game theory approach in sports like football or baseball or sports where you're not doing your own projections there? Are you kind of using a little bit more game theory?
Definitely. I definitely look at ownership and whatnot a lot more in those, and I think you need to, because they're less projectable for sure.
Okay.
I didn't play baseball really last season, so I don't remember exactly what I did there. Again, football, I tweaked my strategy so many times between trying to project things, trying to rely on the sites more, and nothing was really working. So I can't really speak on what's helpful there. But yeah, I think you have to. It definitely depends on the sport, right? I think the more projectable it is, the less game theory you need to use. But on sports like baseball, I know the guys who do really well with those are more the guys who are using more randomness and playing more contrarian compared to the field. And I think it's a very different style than basketball, which is why I think I'm pretty darn mediocre at baseball and pretty good at basketball.
Yeah, I had my first good baseball year this past year. I think maybe even my first profitable season playing baseball this year. And it was definitely, I think, just taking more of a contrarian approach. I think it's hard to kind of figure that out. You can't just play, this great team is playing at Coors Field against a bad pitcher. Everybody wants to play him, and that's just really not how you win at baseball. So I think you're right that you need to take a much more game theory based approach in sports that are not nearly as projectable as basketball. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I want to transition a little bit to talking about the DFS Pro lifestyle. So last year when I met you at the Tournament of Champions, part of the reason that I was really excited to meet you, other than just, having followed you for years, is that I was trying to figure out at the time, do I want to go pro in DFS? I had a full-time job, and it was a good enough job. I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't happy in my job, but it was, good benefits, paid me okay. So I was a little bit hesitant, even though I had won the Millie a couple months prior, and I had always assumed if I won a tournament that big, I would quit my job. But then once it happened, I was kind of like, do I really want to do this? Like, a Millie is not something you can live on for the rest of your life. You got to be pretty sure that you can play DFS for the rest of your life and that you want to. So I was trying to figure out, as I was talking to you, should I quit my job? And I don't remember exactly what you said, partially because I think we were drinking a fair amount, but we talked a little bit about it. I was kind of asking you your opinion. And my takeaway from what you told me is that you don't really enjoy playing DFS professionally. And this is in line with what you said on Lowell's episode 130. You said, there's no such thing as being a professional and having fun. I'm curious if that is still true for you. Did winning $1 million all at once kind of take a little bit of the edge off, let you breathe a little bit so you can enjoy a little bit, even if you're going on kind of a downswing? Or, I mean, at your volume, I guess $1 million isn't quite as much and you're winning other tournaments all the time, but did it take the edge off at all? Or are you enjoying DFS at all a little bit more now? Because you've had a really successful run, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously things are way more enjoyable when you're winning, but that's not how it goes. You're generally going to be losing most nights, and it's a tough feeling to, be in the last game of the slate, realize that you're not going to win, and you spent all this time all day working on things, and you end up down. Yesterday I realized pretty early that I wasn't going to make money no matter what happened, and I put so much time in yesterday because it was an 11-game slate, and the action was huge, and it's a tough feeling. It really is. And those at that time, I've had about a couple bad weeks, but I try to focus on the long term, and for me, like, I've had a good NBA season, so it's hard for me to complain too much about a couple bad weeks, but it's also hard to not be in the moment, right? So obviously, if I could choose a different lifestyle to be able to make this kind of money and do that, maybe I would do that instead. I really enjoy basketball, but at the same time, it is pretty darn stressful. It is. And like, I don't think when something goes against me, I don't think things like personally, but like when I'm, again, because I do my own stuff, when I'm wrong on stuff, it's a hard pill to swallow. And sometimes, again, I look really stupid, and it's tough to look so bad, but that's just kind of the way it goes, right? And to be, I'm not saying like I'm the greatest or great or anything, but like to be great, you gotta take chances on stuff, and again, you're gonna be right sometimes, you're gonna be wrong sometimes, but when you're right, things go really well.
I'd say you're pretty great. I think the audience would probably agree. Your track record kind of speaks for itself there, so you don't need to say it, but I'd say it's true. I think you also said that you're kind of a mess when you watch the games. That was a quote from one of the shows you did, that it sounds like you watch the games, and part of it obviously is how you learn about DFS. You can learn stuff from watching the games, but is it really just kind of because you like to follow along? I know that there are some pros who just don't pay attention during the games. I'm definitely more along your lines, where every day I'm kind of following along, and it's heartbreaking when it doesn't go your way, and it's really excited when it does go your way. So do you watch because you just enjoy the sweat, or do you watch because you're trying to learn about sports?
I mean, there's a lot of different factors. I'm, part degenerate, partly love the NBA, partly, I put so many hours in working on that day's slate. I want to watch and see how things go, right? And, sometimes it's great. You're watching your guy. He's, like De'Aaron Fox. He comes out hot out of the gate. Not many guys have him, and he's like two points per minute in the first quarter, first half. Like, it's awesome. And then you get the other end of the spectrum. You got OG Anunoby, who's rocking like a -1 after 8 minutes and 2 fouls. Just like, this sucks.
Yeah.
Like, my slate is dependent on this guy, and he's not doing it. And I think that's, it's obvious how, that's the case. When your top guy is not doing well, you're going to do poorly. And it seems like I've done that a lot lately. And your top guy should be like that solid, big value. So like when that happens, it makes you think like, am I doing something really wrong? Did I just like completely lose my edge overnight? And it does create a lot of self-doubt. But day to day, it's so crazy how you can swing from being so smart to so dumb.
I know that exact feeling. If you're on a winning streak, you feel like you're the smartest guy in the room. And then right now I'm on kind of a losing streak, and I feel like, man, am I ever going to win at DFS again? It's definitely a struggle all the time. So, and I think it's more pronounced when you play professionally, because you're like, this is how I make money, and I'm losing money at it. How does this work? So I definitely get that, that aspect of being professional. It makes it a little bit less fun when you're more reliant on the money as opposed to just kind of a side income. So yeah, definitely. I agree with you that it can be a little bit more stressful now that I'm doing it professionally. But I still, for me, it's worth it rather than doing, the job that I had before, doing some other kind of work. So I guess that's where, kind of takes the edge off, just knowing that I don't have a boss that I have to report to. So it's kind of, I think I prefer playing professionally. I finally just quit my job in September after giving a little bit more thought, making sure that I was serious about this. So finally did it, joined you in the professional ranks. But yeah, I definitely can see how it would be taxing after a little while if you're on a little bit of a downswing.
Yeah, I mean, and you got to keep in mind, like I was looking at my rotor track earlier. I've been playing since 2014, 2015. So I've been doing this for 8 years now. I keep looking at the clock, see what year we're in. I've been doing this for 8 years now. So like, if I can make this money doing other things like I enjoy, I would gladly do it. But obviously that's not the case right now. And I still have goals financially that I want to hit. And I'm still doing well, right? it'd be a lot easier for me to quit if I was having like a really mediocre season, but I'm having a pretty good season. So it's hard for me to quit. I do see myself doing, I feel like I say this every year, and now it's a little hard to say this because I'm doing well. But I see myself like a couple years away from being done and moving on to the next thing. Yeah. But as long as I'm doing as well as I am right now, it's hard for me to move on.
Yeah, we actually talked about that last year a little bit at the Tournament of Champions. We were talking about how you were telling me that you think that there's a lot of great players kind of entering the fold. And I think one that we were talking about in particular last year was Whistles Go Woo, was pretty new to DFS and was just taking the world by storm. And now this year, I think Oxen Duck kind of has to enter that conversation as well. And you told me that you were prepared to move on from DFS if the field caught up with you. But like you said, you're doing pretty well. I mean, you a day after we had that conversation, you won $1 million. Yeah. I saw that the NFL this year, you won $200,000 in this contest. You've talked about how you didn't have a great NFL contest, but at least you had one contest where you won $200,000. Yeah. So not the worst season, I guess.
No, it was a losing season, but it could have been a bigger losing season, obviously.
Cuts into it a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say, and you're also right now, I think you said you're having your best NBA season yet. This is a couple months ago, so that can change pretty quickly. Are you still at least close to having your most successful? I mean, you've had a lot of great NBA seasons looking through your results.
Yeah, I think this is my second best season right now. And obviously we still have some time left, but I don't play to the end of the season either. I play for about another month and a half, and then I move on because I learned about 2-3 years ago that I'm not very good at, the garbage time where teams are tanking, and it's a lot less patterns of repeatable games. So I move on and just try to enjoy life.
I appreciate you moving on, because that was when I had my most success last year. That was when I first started winning tournaments, was after we got to that garbage time kind of stuff, and probably some of the sharks had left. So I guess that was I appreciate you allowing some other people to win a little bit last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my style, so whatever you're doing is probably makes a lot more sense.
Let's take a moment here so I can tell you about our sponsor, No House Advantage. No House Advantage is bringing you a different way to enjoy DFS with player props contests. It's 100% peer-to-peer to help level the playing field. Over 500 player props are offered, and all new users get a $25 deposit bonus with promo code Awesemo. That's AWESEMO. No House Advantage has mass entry capability and big prize pools. Beat your friends, not the house. Use our No House Advantage projections and optimal lineup tool to help you take down big prizes. Download in the App Store or play on nohouseadvantage.com. You mentioned that you didn't play MLB last year. So do you actually take breaks from DFS? Like, do you ever have like months off where you don't play anything?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I definitely do. And it seems like forever ago. I can't even remember what I was doing back in early October now. I guess COVID was kind of a big thing back then. But, I have a bunch of hobbies I do. I play a lot of sports. Like right now I play in 2 basketball leagues and a softball league. And when NBA dies out, I'll be able to play pickleball a lot more and stuff. So I play a lot of sports, play a lot of Call of Duty. I have a lot of things that I can do to take my time. And it's obviously spending more time with my wife and whatnot.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I took a week off. I think just last week or a couple weeks. I guess in Arizona I took a week off, but that was I don't often do that. So maybe that's something that I need to start building in now that I'm trying to do this professionally and it's a little bit more pressure involved. Maybe I'll take that and take that approach a little bit more. But getting back to my previous question, where I was going with it is, you're talking about how you're ready to move on and that there are a lot of great players moving in. Do you think that there is a diminishing edge in DFS? And is that something that you're concerned about? Because I think I've heard different pros have completely different perspectives on this. I think Alex isn't really that worried about it. Steve Buzzard, I don't think, is concerned about any kind of diminishing edge, the field getting too good, based on what I've talked with them, the little bit I've talked with them about it. And then I think guys like Brick75, who both of us watch on Lowell's, seems to be a little bit more concerned about potentially the edge is going away because the sites are getting a little bit too good, projections are getting too good. Where do you fall on that spectrum? Are you concerned about the edge going away and kind of not being able to, this not being sustainable, this success that you're having in DFS? Or do you think that it's something that, you can always kind of change as other people change, you can change too and kind of stay on top?
So I think I'll be okay because I play such a different style than everybody else. That's probably why I don't do content, because I know if I did content, I would not want to not give my 100% and mislead people. And if I do that, I might potentially give up my edge. If I do that, obviously I'm done. There's no reason for me to do content anymore if have no edge in my mind. So I think I'll be okay. I actually, like, historically, I'm almost as good ROI wise in the high stakes as low stakes. And I think that's because in high stakes, people are a lot more solid, but they play a lot more similar. And a lot of the high stakes guys are guys who do really well at low stakes because they play that maybe a more chalky game theory style that works out really well at the low stakes. But they move the high stakes and there's like, instead of, 10 of them or maybe 20 of them in a contest of 100,000, there's 20 of them in a contest of like 1,000 now. And they're all playing the same style. And I think they kind of overlap each other and it makes it easier for me being different. So because I can beat high stakes still for a decent amount, I'll be okay. Once I can't beat high stakes anymore, that's when it's going to be a very obvious time for me to move on.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. As long as you have the edge. I mean, I'm also on the side of, I'm not that worried about it right now because although I definitely use publicly available tools a lot more than you do, I kind of feel like, you can't really, I could tell people exactly what I do, and it's really hard to replicate somebody else's process. And, in the moment, the decision-making as news comes out, I feel like is different for everybody. So, you can kind of give people a blueprint, but nobody can replicate exactly what you're going to do. So I think I fall more on your side of the spectrum of, I'm not that concerned about it, but also something I'm going to be monitoring closely. If I'm losing for a few months at a time, I'm going to be monitoring, am I just not playing well? Do I not have an edge at this point, or what's going on exactly? Why am I not winning anymore? I think it's kind of important to just pay attention to what's happening and why it's happening when you are on a downswing, if it is the field catching up.
Yeah, definitely. What's this publicly available tools thing you keep saying? Is that like an Awesemo thing that for the?
Oh, I just mean Awesemo. Yeah.
Okay.
I use the Awesemo tools.
I always heard the Awesemo motto saying where we use publicly available tools. I like that.
Yeah, no, that's all I mean by it is I don't do my own projections. So like you are making your own projections, doing your own stuff. I'm just using what Awesemo gives me and, adjusting, but I'm not using any kind of math-based approach. I don't have any kind of tools that I've created that I'm using privately. So I'm just using, Fantasy Cruncher and the Boom Bust tool, the stuff that is on the Awesemo site typically. So yeah, it's all publicly available. Obviously you have to pay for it, but yeah, I think that's a difference. I think Jordan Cooper referred to you as an originator. You originate some of your own content. So you have stuff that only you use that nobody else uses in your projections. Whereas I don't really originate anything. I'm just using what's publicly available. So that's all I mean by that. You also said on Jordan Cooper's podcast recently, and we talked about this. You touched on a little bit high stakes versus low stakes, but you were giving him a hard time about the fact that he has been successful at large field contests with lower entry fees, and he hasn't really tried to step up at all. He hasn't tried to move to the higher entry fee contests. And you're kind of giving him a hard time about that maybe he should at least take a shot at it because he's, a sound DFS player. You'd think that maybe he would be good at higher stakes. But I am sad to report that after having success in lower stakes, I tried to move up to higher stakes this past year and I was not successful. And I look at my roto track, you can look at your results based on entry fees. And I'm actually lifetime a losing player in contest with an entry fee of $50 or more. So I tried to move up a little bit and was not successful at that. So I have to ask, it's a personal question for me. Were you able to level up quickly? Did you find that you were quickly able to move up from low stakes to high stakes, or did that take you a little bit of time to make that transition? And do you have any tips for players like myself who are trying to move up in stakes, found success at one level and trying to find success at a new level? Do you have any tips for players that might want to spend a little bit more and see if they can, keep going at higher stakes?
Yeah, I've been at high stakes for a while. I don't remember exactly the climb up, but back when I first got in high stakes, I was a one lineup guy. I was doing cash games, and back then you could put your cash game in a high stakes tournament and it'd be okay. It wasn't a big deal. And I think I had success early on enough where I didn't really hit any bumps, if I remember correctly. So I was actually pretty okay moving up. I don't really remember the transition, to be honest with you, but I kind of what I said earlier. If you can win high stakes, you win low stakes. But if you win a low stakes, you can't necessarily win a high stakes. It's just a different animal, and it takes a different kind of skill set. I think one of the things that low stakes guys maybe do. I know that I've looked at the boom bust tool a little bit. Maybe I think the boom bust tool is more effective at the low stakes stuff because there's more entries in it, and you need more of a boom. You don't necessarily need like 8 booms in a high stakes lamp to win, right? With less guys. So
Interesting.
Maybe my style is a little more safe in terms of versus like the floor versus ceiling, whereas a guy like yourself is doing more bust tools, and you're getting more highly volatile guys that maybe aren't as effective at the high stakes.
That makes sense. And the boom bust tool, I believe, is geared towards those large field GPPs. So it would make sense that using that kind of thing wouldn't be as effective in the higher stakes stuff, because it's not the same player pool. The ownership projections are definitely going to be far off for something like the boom bust from the high stakes. So yeah, it's a really interesting point that those kind of things, you can't use them as much. You have to just kind of factor in. I mean, you say that you're more projections based anyway. I would think that using more of a projections based approach rather than an ownership based approach in those high fields makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, and back with the ownership thing a bit, that's something I forgot to mention, is that the one issue I have with ownership is that I know like almost everybody, like the vast majority of people who are successful DFS use ownership. And the problem with that is that most people use the websites for ownership. And if everybody uses the websites for ownership, you'll get the same. If there's a mistake somewhere, everybody will be like, oh, this guy should be owned way more, but look at him, he's owned 50% according to the website. Well, if everybody does the same thing, then all of a sudden this guy's going to balloon to 40%, and that's a huge mistake. So I think that's another reason why it works out for me in high stakes, because a lot of the ownerships get inflated like crazy when there's a mistake there. And I think that's another edge that I have that other people would not have.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. That the tools kind of are eating their tails. So they're telling you one thing, and then everybody's looking at the same thing. So we think, oh, this player is going to be low owned, but everybody's looking at the same thing, thinking that that's what's going to be the case, and they adjust accordingly. And then of course it changes what the ownership is. So I think that it's kind of depends on how big the contest is. Probably in the largest field like NFL contest, it's not as big of an issue because such a small percentage of people are looking at the tools in like the NFL huge field tournaments. But like NBA in particular, I think maybe not most, but a large number of NBA DFS players are pretty serious about it and are using tools. I think more so than NFL in particular, and maybe golf, some of the other sports where it might be more accurate in general. That's an interesting point.
It's definitely more of a casual fan base in NFL and golf than NBA. NBA takes like a different kind of hardcore fan, in my opinion. And there's a lot more stats available, where golf, like I think in golf, you have the hardcore fans, but like they're more like, oh, look who's been winning the last 3 weeks, rather than NBA. People are a lot more sophisticated.
Yep, that's definitely, and I think more sophisticated recently too. I feel like a couple of years ago, people would massively overreact to a player having a really good game or getting a minutes boost for one game. I feel like it's gotten much better in general recently too. Yeah.
I mean, sites are getting better and smarter, and it's not necessarily a bad thing for GPP people, because the smarter the sites are getting, maybe when the sites do well and they win. Actually, no, that's not necessarily true. I take that back.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely not a good thing, but I think you can adjust. Like that's where I think if you're a good player, you can maintain an edge by just adjusting to what the field is doing. So if the field is getting better at projecting, that's where I think game theory can come in a little bit more useful in those scenarios. Yeah. And I think you said that you don't play any cash games, right? You used to be primarily a cash game player. At this point, I think you said the past 3 or 4 years, you only play GPPs. Is that the case? And what led you to that decision to dump playing cash games and just focus on GPPs full time?
There's multiple reasons. One, GPPs are just a lot more to my personality than cash games. Cash games, you have a player pool of, however many teams times like maybe 2 or 3 guys per team max. It's just like, there's not many guys to really choose from. It's like the most interesting decision is like, do I play this 2v2 or this 2v2 or 3v3? Like that doesn't excite me at all. Like playing these guys that are like 1 or 2% owned, 50% because they're in this great spot that nobody sees, that is way more profitable for someone of my style. So that's one reason I play no cash. Another reason is like the CSV part is really difficult for me to figure out, like trying to separate the two. If I could have a separate CSV for both, maybe I play cash. But like I'm doing things so late that I'm going to screw up multiple times a season. It's going to really tilt me. So like that's the reason I hate it. I have a buddy who recently started playing cash as well to try to supplement his GPP stuff, and he had issues like half the nights he tried to do it. And I'm just like, you have a large GPP edge. Don't screw that up by trying to get a little extra money on cash when the edges are not as big. And lastly, if I did play cash, I wouldn't want to just play like the $100 double up and whatever for like 2,000 of action. I would try to dominate the lobby. and take the 3 and 5 mans. But that can be pretty volatile. And I think it could be pretty lucrative. I know the guys who are out there doing that, it's pretty lucrative for them, but right now it's just not worth my time to try to separate from GPPs. If GPPs weren't as lucrative as they are, I would probably try to dominate the cash lobby, but because I think I can do better at GP, I'm just going to stay here.
Yep, that makes sense. And I have the exact same thought process. It's just with the rake involved in cash, it feels like it's just such a small edge. You have to be, so much better than the field to overcome that rake in a cash game setting. So it's pretty tough. So I definitely I'm on the same page as you there. And a big part of it for me is I also agree, just figuring out the CSV could be complicated with cash games, just making those changes. And I have the same worry that, and I'm sure it's probably simple once you figure it out. I'm sure there are people who know how to play cash and GPPs, but I just don't want to risk messing with my GPP success by trying to do cash games as well. So definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, as you shouldn't, by the way. And I had a thought and I completely forgot it.
Okay.
I can't remember it. But yeah. So cash games, another thing about cash games that's annoying is that to be successful, you need to find bad players. You can't just play 3 other pros in a 4-man and make money. So it's really dependent on who's joining your games and whatnot. And that's why I think, being bullying the lobby, for lack of a better word, is something that's really important to being a super successful cash game player. If you don't bully the lobby, you're going to spread out the fish between more players. And that's annoying too.
Yeah. So I think that if you wanted to be a successful cash game player, I would think you would really need to only have one lineup to be really successful at it, to just have, including GPPs. So there are guys who I think are successful. I think EM2 is an example of somebody who is good at cash games, but he also only plays one lineup across his GPPs. So because I think for GPP players, especially in NBA, close to lock, you need to be adjusting so many different things that it'd be hard to focus on both your cash lineup and your 150 GPP lineups. So I think that makes it pretty tough to do both in NBA in particular.
Yeah, and you have to be watching the 3 and 5-man lobbies constantly, seeing if some fish joins and joining it. It just reminds me of the poker days when you're looking for that bad player joining the table, and I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and if you're making enough money at GPPs, not even worth it.
Yeah.
So speaking of lifestyle stuff and moving on potentially from DFS, it sounds like it's not going to be happening anytime soon, I don't think. But I was rewatching one of my streams recently. I rewatched some of them sometimes to figure out what I might be able to do better eventually. But I was watching the stream where myself and Rinpack were both on the Contrary show that Lofty was hosting, and rewatching the stream, I caught you in the comments. As you say, you comment, if you're watching the stream, you're in the comments, and you were saying that Lofty needs to teach me and Rinpack how to set up our backgrounds, and I can't really disagree with you there. I think at the time I actually had a blurred background because there's just not really much going on in my office, and I've got a painting behind me, but not a whole lot going on here. So point taken. But I see your background in all of your different streams. Your background is always immaculate. You've got jerseys in the background. Right now you've got a Draymond Green jersey. At one point I think you had a Jahlil Okafor jersey. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually hanging over my right shoulder with the Ingram jersey.
So you've always got this great background. You're set up to be streaming DFS content. Is that something that you ever see yourself doing? I know that you used to do Twitch streams. I don't know if that was related to DFS. I was not aware of them at the time, so I missed your Twitch days. But I know I've heard people reference that you used to do Twitch. I think you told me that last year. You did some content. Would you ever get back into DFS content, or is that something that, you said that you don't want to give up your edge, or you don't want to give advice that isn't 100%, and you also don't want to give up your edge. So in the short term, it sounds like you don't have any plans to get into content. Is that something you might consider at some point?
I never say never. I did Twitch for, I would say 3-4 months. I built a pretty big subscriber pool quickly, but it just wasn't financially worth it to me. I enjoy going on shows. I enjoy talking about DFS. I really do, because it's a pretty isolating thing when you're doing it solo. But if the right offer came along, could I join a strategy site? Yeah, potentially. I'm never going to say no, but it doesn't really seem like it's in my future right now. It is something I enjoy doing, but again, I'm just doing well enough right now in DFS to not have to do that. And I do enjoy having a somewhat free schedule. Like, I know people say they love having a non-9-to-5 schedule, but during NBA season, I am pretty stuck here.
Okay. So you're still feeling like you're pretty busy. I mean, you wanted to do this stream early in the morning for you, which, as I said earlier, kind of surprised me. But I guess that's how you can move on with your day, open up the rest of your day to kind of focus on DFS stuff. The last DFS slate that we have, I guess, before the All-Star break. So
yeah, it's good timing. I'm excited to get a little break because I've been playing so many days in a row. It feels like, and B, I've just been getting crushed. But the thing is, in NBA, like, I can do minutes on a bunch of teams right now, but I can't do the questionable. If I do the questionable teams, like, things could change quickly. So the longer I wait, the more effective the minutes are going to be. And it sucks to do minutes on a team, and all of a sudden, like, questionable guys out that I projected in, and I get stuck basically if I do minutes too early.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So let's close it out. I just got one question from a listener that I thought was a good one that I thought would be interesting to hear your response. So I want to close it out with this question. It's obviously an invalid list because he said, exclude yourself from this conversation. But I was asked, excluding yourself, who would you put on your NBA DFS Mount Rushmore?
Oh, man. Yeah, I was thinking about this. So I've always said that I have a lot of respect for the guys who've been around for a long time and have been successful and are still around, because you'll understand. It's like, assuming you're playing DFS still in 5 years and crushing still, you'll see this where you'll hear a guy's name and you're like, oh, I completely forgot about the guy. He was doing so well. And it happens all the time. It's out of sight, out of mind with these guys. So I have a lot of respect for the guys who've been around for a while and are still playing high stakes. So I'd say my Mount Rushmore, 4 guys. It's funny. It's 2 teams of guys. So it's the Kobe for MVP, Chetabisk team. Those 2 guys have been around a long time and been successful. And then Maswa and Raging Phelps have been around a long time. Those guys have done good too. But I would say, if I had to choose like the top, I'd say I don't look at people's stuff often, especially these days. Like, I don't look back in FC Rewind or whatever Lamp Study, I think it's called. I don't do that as much as I used to, but if I did look at somebody, it would probably be the Kobe for MVP guys, because those guys play pretty different style as well, and they're NBA only guys too. So I know it's not. I feel like the NBA only guys, being their specialty, they play a more different style rather than the guys who play all the sports and are just like game theory guys. So I'd say those 4 guys. Probably Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
But I'd say the first 2, the Kobe for MVP, Chetabisk team, is definitely my top 2. After that, it's a lot closer. But yeah, guys have been around for a long time. I have a lot of respect for it.
I heard you say teams, and I was assuming that you're going to the Chipotle Bros right away. We talked about them last year at the Tournament of Champions, as they're guys that and you seem to like. Yeah. I guess they don't do NBA quite as much, so maybe they're not primed for the NBA Mount Rushmore as much as other sports.
I think they're extremely good at all sports. Maybe that's why I don't put them in the Mount Rushmore. I'm thinking more of like NBA only guys.
Okay.
But like DFS Mount Rushmore, like, those guys are 100%. Both of them are in it. And yeah, I know that because the brothers, everybody considers them a team, but like, I don't think they work as closely as the other guys I just mentioned.
Okay.
But yeah, those 2 guys are definitely my DFS Mount Rushmore for sure. They're awesome.
Awesome. Well, that was really great answer. I think a good way to close this out. Interesting to think about. Those are obviously some names that I know that I've been paying attention to. So, and I think it goes without saying that if you could include yourself, you would probably be on the Mount Rushmore of NBA DFS. But that wasn't the question that was posed, and maybe you wouldn't put yourself on your own. Maybe you're humble about it, but I think for guys like me, we can put you on our NBA DFS Mount Rushmore as well. But really appreciate you coming on the show today, Travis. It was a lot of fun talking DFS with you. We got a chance to talk a little bit last year, and we missed our chance this year at the Tournament of Champions. So I was glad that I could bring you on here to get my fix of talking DFS with you. Really fun to come on. Is there anywhere that people can catch you outside of? I know on Twitter, I believe your handle is at Petty Theft.
Yeah.
PETTEYTHEFT. Anywhere else that people can catch you doing content or anything else?
Not really. My Twitter's not overly exciting these days either. I post pretty rarely. I know I enjoy doing shows. If anybody wants me on a show, I'll probably come on. Honestly, I enjoy doing the shows. And as for Arizona, I don't know where you were hiding. I honestly didn't see you one single time. So maybe I was hiding. Yeah, I was pretty surprised.
I saw you once from afar, but yeah, I was looking for you a little bit on the Sunday while we were watching the games, and I didn't see you in that room at all. So
I wasn't in that room at all. My day ended early, and it's weird going to those events. I enjoy the activities outside of the actual live final. Going live final for me is very tough because, as I told you, I watch the game really closely, and every play means so much to me. And when you go there, like every single play is cheered like crazy, and the majority of plays are not going to be good for you. So it just it crushes me going to those events and watching against everybody else.
Yeah, I can understand that. I kind of felt the same way. It wasn't quite as fun as just watching in my own, living room, but it was still fun to interact with people. So let's run it back next year. Let's both get back to the Tournament of Champions again, hang out, not during the game, but before the game again. Hopefully we can see each other again there.
For sure.
All right. Thanks again to Travis Pettey for joining me on High Stakes Episode 2. High Stakes Episode 3 will be available next Friday on the Awesemo YouTube channel or wherever podcasts live. Have a great night.